We begin today the Gemara on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, 11 lines from the top, where it says Amar Rav Shmuel by Yitzchak. So the Gemara before brought up the discussion about the minimum size for a sukkah to be kosher. So now the Gemara is going to get into this discussion, even though it was a side subject, but the Gemara is going to go into the details about this halacha. Amar Rav Shmuel by Yitzchak. The halacha is tzricha, the sukkah has to be shetei machzekes roishai v'rubei v'shulchanai, large enough that it could hold in it the person's head, most of his body, and the table. Rashi explained before, on Molige Zeiten, the way they used to sit and eat was, they didn't sit straight in a chair, but they were spread out, like leaning spread out. So therefore you have to have space for his body, for his head and his body, which is spread out, most of his body, and the table. That's how big it has to be. How big is the size? So the Gemara will later say that this size is 7 by 7 tfachim. So Rabbi said to Rav Shmuel by Yitzchak, Keman, according to who are you saying this measurement? Kebei Shammai. This is according to Beis Shammai's opinion. Because, as the Gemara is soon going to quote, Beis Shammai is the one that says that when you sit in the sukkah, you have to have your table also in the sukkah. Not only your head and most of your body, but the table as well. According to Beis Hillel, your table doesn't have to be in the sukkah. So that wouldn't be part of the size of the sukkah. So Amalei, so Rav Shmuel by Yitzchak answered back, yeah, you're right, Ela Kaman. Like, who else would it be according to? It could only be according to Beis Shammai. Yeah, so this is a unique case. This is an exception that we paskin like Beis Shammai. Usually we don't paskin like Beis Shammai, but here we're machmer like Beis Shammai. Others said about this conversation, a little bit of a different version in this conversation. Rabbi said to Rav Shmuel by Yitzchak, the Amalach Mani, who told you this minimum size of a sukkah? Amalei, so Rav Shmuel by Yitzchak said to him, Beis Shammai, this is Beis Shammai's opinion. Now you might think, Beis Shammai, we never paskin like Beis Shammai. V'loi tazuz mino, don't move away from this halacha. Here we do paskin like a Beis Shammai. Okay? So now the Gemara will bring the source of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel's opinion, and the Gemara will ask, not necessarily were Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel talking about the minimum size of a sukkah. And as we'll see here in the Gemara, there are two different subjects. One subject is, what's the minimum size of a sukkah? The other subject is, how do you fulfill the mitzvah of a sukkah? When you sit in the sukkah, does the table have to be with you or not? So let's see what Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel spoke about. So Maskala Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman Yitzchak asked the question, Mimai, how do you know? The Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, Besukkah Ketana Pligi, they were arguing about a small sukkah. In other words, the point of their machlokes was, how small could the smallest sukkah be? Do you have to have a table fit in or not? Dilma, perhaps, Besukkah Gedele Pligi. They're talking about a very large sukkah. The issue of their machlokes is not about the size of the sukkah. The Kagain, now what's the case here? They're talking about how you do the mitzvah. The Yosef Apume de Metalalta. He has a very big sukkah, but he's sitting right at the entrance of the sukkah. And the table is not inside the house. Not inside the sukkah, that is. The table is inside the house. Maybe why would a person do such a thing? Let's say it would be raining, so he wants to sit inside the sukkah to do the mitzvah, but he doesn't want all his food and everything on the table to get wet. So the table is inside the house, and he's sitting inside the sukkah, but it's really a large sukkah. They're not discussing the size of a sukkah. They're discussing, when you sit in the sukkah, how much of you has to be inside. The Beis Shammai say that Gazrinon, we have a gzeira, we're afraid, Shema Yimashach HaShulchanai. If his table is not in the sukkah, he might be drawn after his table, and he's going to end up eating outside the sukkah. Beis Hillel Savri, and Beis Hillel holds, like Gazrinon. No, we don't make such a gzeira. We're not afraid that he's going to be outside the sukkah. So they're talking about how you fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. They're not discussing the minimum size of the sukkah. Maybe regarding the minimum size of the sukkah, even Beis Hillel would agree that the size has to have room for a table. But when you do the mitzvah, the table doesn't have to be inside, but maybe the size does have to be large enough for a table. So why are we saying that the psak of Rav Shmuel by Yitzchak was only according to Beis Shammai and not according to Beis Hillel? Not only that, the Gemara says, V'dei kenami, and I'll prove to you also from the actual language that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel use in their machlokes, the Ktani, because the lashon of the Mishnah there is as follows. Someone that his head and most of his body was inside the sukkah. And the tables in the house. Beis Shammai paislin. Beis Shammai says that's postel. Beis Hillel machshirin. Beis Hillel says it's kosher. So now the Gemara is going to say, what does it say? Mi shahaya. Someone that it happens to be that his table was not inside the sukkah. So Gemara says, why does it say Mi shahaya? Ve'im isa. Now if it's going to be true that machzekes, ve'ena machzek, again, ve'im isa, if it's going to be true that they're arguing about a tiny sukkah, and the question is whether that sukkah has space for a table or not, machzekes, ve'ena machzekes mi bayale. The language of their machlekes should have been a sukkah that could hold a table in it or could not hold a table in it. Not mishahaya. Mishahaya means it could hold even a table, it could hold even more. What happens to be that there was only, that he didn't put his table inside the sukkah. Why didn't they say the lashon of machzekes, ve'ena machzekes, whether could it hold space for the table or not? Okay, so from what do you see from this? You see from this that they're not arguing about a small sukkah. They're not arguing about the size of the sukkah. What are they arguing about? They're arguing about a huge sukkah, let's say. But the question is your table inside the sukkah or not? Does it have to be inside the sukkah or not? Okay? So, but the Gemara now asks the question, the Gemara is going to bring a raya for the reverse. The Gemara is going to bring a raya that no, they are arguing about the size of a smallest sukkah. They're not arguing about the size of the smallest sukkah. I'll bring you a raya that there is an argument about the size of the smallest sukkah. Tanya, because we learned in one braisa, how small could the smallest sukkah be? If it could hold his head, most of his body, and the table, it's kosher. Rebbe says, how large does the smallest sukkah have to be? Arba ames al arba ames. It has to be 4 by 4 ames. That's one braisa. Tanya, then we learned in another braisa. Rebbe said, Kol sukkah shein ba arba ames al arba ames psula. A sukkah that does not have 4 by 4 ames is going to be puzzle. So that's the same. Rebbe's opinion, a sukkah has to be 4 by 4 ames. Chachamim say, Afile eino machzekes el roishoi v'rubai ksheira. A sukkah that could hold his head and most of his body is kosher. Vilu shulchanoi, like a tani. In this braisa, it does not say that the sukkah has to be large enough to contain the table in it. So now we have a contradiction. Kashina Dodi, these two braisas are a contradiction. In one braisa, the Chachamim said that it has to be large enough to hold the table inside. In another braisa, it did not mention anything about the table. So there's a contradiction over here. Do you have to have large enough for the table or not? So what are you going to answer? Elo lav. The answer is going to be Shmami no. From here is going to be a raya. Ha Beis Shammai. The braisa that says it has to be large enough for the table is Beis Shammai. And Ha Beis Hillel. The braisa that says that it does not have to be a table, is large enough for the table, is Beis Hillel. So what do you see from all of this? The argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is actually about a small sukkah. How small could the smallest sukkah be? You can't say that they're only arguing about a large sukkah and you're doing the mitzvah, do you have to have the table with you in the sukkah? No, they are arguing about the smallest sukkah. Does it have to be the size that a table could fit in? Okay, so what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, Mazutre goes even further. And he says, Masnisin nami deken. Now, I'll show you from the language of the Mishnah that they're actually arguing about a small sukkah. Why? Mediktani, because what did it say in the Mishnah? Beis Shammai poislin. Beis Shammai says that if the table is not inside, it's puzzle. He uses the term puzzle. Well, Beis Hillel machshirin. Beis Hillel say it's kosher. If what you said before is true, that really it's a very big sukkah. But the question is, are you going to be yaitze the mitzvah if your table is not inside or not? We're not talking about the sukkah itself. We're just talking about whether you're yaitze the mitzvah or not. If that's true, then why does it say poislin or machshirin? It should have said something else. Beis Shammai yoimrim lo yotza. It should have said Beis Shammai says you're not yaitze because the table is not inside. Or Beis Hillel yoimrim yotza. And Beis Hillel say you are yaitze. It's not an issue about the sukkah itself. The question is if you're yaitze the mitzvah. Mi boyali. That's what it should have said. Okay, so now we have a big problem here because basically what it comes out is, if you look at this Mishnah, part of the lashon of the Mishnah proves that they're talking about a large sukkah. Because the Gemara before said, it doesn't say machzekes, that they're arguing whether it could contain the space, but it says mi shahaya, that your table happened to have been outside. But the other part of the Mishnah says machshirin and paislin, it's mashma that they're arguing about the minimum size of the sukkah. So the Gemara now asks, ve'ela kashya mi shahaya. But not a question is going to be before, from the language Misha Haya, we proved that they're arguing about a large sukkah. So what's going on over here? Are they arguing about a large sukkah? And the argument is about how you do the mitzvah? Or they're arguing about a small sukkah? And the argument is about what's the minimum size of the sukkah? So we're going to answers, and this is the final conclusion. Lo'olam betarti pligi. So really we're going to have to say the argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is two different arguments. Pligi b'sukkah ketana. They're arguing about a small sukkah, and the argument is about how small could the smallest sukkah be. That's one argument. And how do we know that that's the argument? Because they said machshirin and paislin. Upligi b'sukkah gedayla. And they're also arguing about a large sukkah, and the machlokes is, how do you do the mitzvah? Do you have to bring your table into that sukkah or not? And there's something missing here in the Mishnah. This is how you have to read the Mishnah. Someone that had most of his head and most of his body in the sukkah, but his table is left in the house. Beis Shammai say you're not yaitza, Beis Hillel lemrim yatza, you are yaitza. So this is the first machlokes. It's a large sukkah. The first machlokes is, if you did not bring your table into the sukkah, are you yaitza the mitzvah or not? Then you continue in the Mishnah, another machlokes, v'she'eino machzekes ela kedei roishe v'rubei bilvad. If the sukkah is so small that it could only hold the head and most of the body, Beis Shammai paislin. Beis Shammai is going to say that it's possible. Beis Hillel machshirin, and Beis Hillel is going to say that such a sukkah, even though your table doesn't fit in, it's still going to be kosher. So there's two different arguments. One about how you do the mitzvah, and one about the minimum size of the sukkah. And according to Tosfos and many Rishonim, these two machlokes have really nothing to do with each other. One machlokes revolves around the lashon of the pasuk, basukis teishvu. What does basukis teishvu mean? Do you have to be able to sit and live in your sukkah comfortably, like you live in your house? Or is it enough if you could live in your sukkah, like squeeze in teishvu, similar to the way you live in the house? Like the Gemara says a lot of times, the lashon ke'en taduru, but it doesn't have to be, even if you could just squeeze in without your table is good enough. That's one machlokes. Then there's another machlokes. When you do the mitzvah, are we concerned that you're going to be drawn after your table, that you're going to end up out of the sukkah if your table is not on the sukkah? It's two different machlokes. So therefore, this is the conclusion here, that there's really two arguments. Just to go back a minute before, there was a third opinion. There's a third opinion regarding the minimum size of the sukkah. What's the third opinion? Rebbe's opinion. Rebbe says that it has to be larger. It has to be 4 by 4 amas. Why 4 by 4 amas? So he also bases it on the basukis teishvu. Usually a person's house is not big enough just for his table and his head and his body, most of his body. Person's house is big enough, dalad by dalad amas. As we'll see soon regarding the halacha of a mezuzah. You're not even chayav a mezuzah if it doesn't have 4 by 4 amas. So therefore the sukkah has to be like your house. Rebbe says it has to be at least as big as the smallest house, which is 4 by 4 amas. That's what teishvu means. Teishvu means literally has to be that size, as big as possible. The Rebbe points out that you see if this machlokes here, this machlokes you find in other places. Do you have to teach the words of the psukim literally 100%? Basukis teishvu shivas yamim, that has to be mamish like your house with all the space you need in your house? Or is it enough? Roishai, Virubai, Shulchana, and we don't teach the pasuk literally with all the details. You find in Shas and a lot of other places this machlokes between these, between the Rebbe and other Tanaim about this. Okay, let's continue. Now the Gemara is going to bring another braisa where it discusses the minimum size of a house regarding other halachas, and the Gemara is going to say maybe we could apply the same thing to a sukkah. Man Tana, who is the Tana Laha, the Tana Rabbanon, to this that we learned in a braisa. Bayis shein by arba amas al arba amas, a house that does not have the minimum size of 4 amas by 4 amas. So now there's a lot of things that the person's not going to have to do. First of all, patam and mezuzah. There's no mitzvah of mezuzah, and the Gemara is soon going to explain because it's not even called a bayis. It's not a house. The mitzvah of putting a fence on the roof so no one should fall down. There's no mitzvah of makeh if it's so small. The halacha of negayim, when you see a neg on the wall of the house, does not apply to a house that's such a small size. And also there's a halacha in Eretz Yisrael in time of the Beis Hamikdash. If you sell a house in a city that is surrounded by a wall, you have 1 year to redeem that house. After a year, the buyer keeps it. So now, but that's only a house. What's if it's like a little place that's less than 4 by 4 amas? That halacha doesn't apply. And also, ve'ein chayzrin alav, you don't return from going with the people into war. What's the halacha of someone that goes into the war? If you are not, if you built a house and you did not yet live in that new house that you built, you don't join the people going out into the war, right? But if the house that you built is so tiny, less than 4 by 4 amas, you don't return from the war. Ve'ema arvim bay, and you don't have to be included in an Eid of Chatzeros. An Eid of Chatzeros is when you have one Chatzer that's shared by many people, and you have different houses that are open to the Eid of Chatzeros. Really, it's all Rishus HaYachid. You're allowed to carry there. But Chachamim made a Gzeira because the houses are private, owned by single individuals, and the Chatzer is a shared place, so therefore you shouldn't carry from your house to the Chatzer. Unless you make an Eid of Chatzeres, which means all the people of the Chatzer take food and they place it in one person's house. Now everybody's living as if everyone's living here in this one house. But if you have a house there that's so small, less than 4 by 4 amas, your house is not even part of this. You don't have to contribute to that food that's placed in that house. And similar also, ve'em ishtatfin boy. Ve'em ishtatfin boy refers to a mavoy, an alleyway. Similar halacha, if you have a lot of different courtyards that then open up into one large alleyway, and that alleyway is then going to go into the Rishus HaRabim. So again, the same Gzeira Chachamim made, because this alleyway is shared by everybody, so you have a few courtyards that are open to this alleyway, they're not allowed to carry out from the private courtyards into the alleyway. What do you have to do? All the people from the courtyards have to put food into one courtyard, and then they are all like living together in that one courtyard, so they can then carry from the courtyard into the alleyway. But again, if this person has a house that's open to one of the courtyards, it's such a tiny house, he doesn't have to contribute. And also, ve'ein manichin b'yedav, you can't place the food of the Edav into this small house. It has to be placed into a house when it's by Edav Chatzeres, but it can't be placed into this small tiny house. Av Gimel Amud Beis. Ve'ein oisen oisoi ibor, and you can't consider it to be an ibor bein shtei ayorais, between two cities. So this is connected to the halacha of Tchum Shabbos. How far is the Tchum Shabbos? You're not allowed to go 2,000 amas. Okay, but as long as you're inside a city, you can go as much as you want. But when you leave the city, you can't walk more than 2,000 amas. So the halacha of every city is that there's from the city, you don't start counting the 2,000 amas from the last house of the city. From where do you start counting it? 70 amas and 2/3. That's the space outside the city that you start counting the 2,000 amas. So let's say, for example, you have two cities that are near each other, and you have 70 amas and 2/3 from one city and 70 amas and 2/3 from the other city, which is together 141 amas and a third. That's the space between them. So then it's considered to be like one big city. Only if the empty space between them is larger than that, so then you can't continue walking from one city to another city as if it's one big city. So here's the thing: if you have a space that's too large between the two cities, and you have a little house in the middle that's going to connect the two cities, and that little house is a house that's smaller than 4 by 4 amas. So because it's smaller than 4 by 4 amas, it's not considered to be a house. It can't connect these two cities. And also another halacha about the small house: ve'ena achin va'shutvin chelkim bay. Brothers or partners, if they are trying to divide their possessions, their properties, they can't divide such a small house. Till here is what it says in this Braisa. So basically we see, if a house is so small, less than 4 by 4 amas, all of these halachas don't apply. So now the Gemara wants to know, Leime, should we say Rebbe? This Braisa here is Rebbe's opinion. Because Rebbe is the one that said the same thing by a Sukkah, that a Sukkah has to be 4 by 4 amas. So we say the same thing by a house, that all the mitzvahs to apply to a house and all the takanas of Chazal to apply to a house is only if it's 4 by 4 amas. V'loi Rabbanon, and this is not the Rabbanon's opinion. According to the Rabbanon, we don't go by the shiur of 4 by 4 amas by a sukkah. We go by a shiur of smaller than that, Reisha v'rubai or Reisha v'rubai v'shulchanai. So the Gemara says, no, you can't compare the machlokes regarding a sukkah to the halacha regarding a house. Why? I could even say that this Braisa here goes according to the Rabbanon, that to say that even this Braisa, even Rabbanon will agree that you have to have the size of 4 by 4 amas for a house. Why? You know why the Rabbanan said over there that it could be a sukkah, could be smaller than 4x4 ames. Elolin sukkah. That's only regarding a sukkah. Why? The diras araihi. A sukkah is a temporary dwelling. So over there, it doesn't have to be so large, 4x4 ames. Avalagabi bayis, but by a house, the diras kvahu, that's a permanent dwelling. Even the Rabbanan will agree. A house that has 4x4 ames, people will live there. People can't live in a house that's less than 4x4 ames. So a house and a sukkah are not the same thing. Okay, now that the Gemara brought this braisa, the Gemara will explain the details of this braisa. So the master said over here in this braisa, Potter min ha-mezuzah, all these things that we explained before. What's the source for this? My time. What's the reason? The bias ksivbo bekulu, because in the pasuk regarding all of them, the Torah uses the term bias. It's to be a house, and the minimum house space of a house that a person lives in, as the Gemara just said, is 4x4 amos. The next thing it said was ve'em ma'arvim by ve'em mishtatfim by ve'em manichim by eidov. So it's not used in any way. It's not part of an Eid of Chatzeris. It's not part of the shittuf that's made by a mavoi, by an alleyway, and you can't place the Eid of there. My timer, what's the reason? This is a takana with the Rabbanan. So what's the reason why Chachamim did not include this in the takana? Deloi chazi ledira, because it's a place that people don't live there. So if people don't live there, so the takana of the Chachamim doesn't apply to this. The whole problem is that someone else is living here as a private dwelling. And then there's a public place where in the chutzah everyone goes. But if no one lives there, it's not an issue. It's not made for a person to live there. So what did it say in the Braise? Now the Gemara has another diuk. It said in the Braise, you can't place the Eid of Chatzeiros into this house. Aval shituf manichim bay. But it's mashma that the shituf, which means when you want to combine all the people for the mavoi, that you could place into the house, right? So there's two different things. There's when you want to combine all the people that the chutzner, all the people of the chutzner, their houses should be like they're living in one house, and when you want to combine all the chatzeiros that are opening up to one mavoi. So it's mashma from this braisa that when you're making a shittu for the mavoi, you can put it in this little house that's less than 4x4 amas. Why is that? My time, what's the reason? The Gemara answers, because this small house, even though nobody could live there, it's no worse than the chutzner itself. When you make the eidov, or it's actually called a shittuf, for the mavi, where do you place the food for this shittuf that you're making for the mavi? You want all the chatzeiros, all the people of all the chatzeiros to be combined for the mavi. Where do you place that food? You place that food into a chutzner. You don't place it indoors. You place it outdoors into a chutzner. So therefore, this house, even though it's a tiny house and no one can live there, it's no worse than the chutzner itself. So the Gemara now explains, it's not. We learned in the Mishnah regarding this. It says as follows: Eruve chatzeiros b'chutzner. The eruve, the food of the eruv chatzeiros, is in the chutzner. Shitufei mavoi b'mavoi. The food that the people combine together for the mavoi, that you place in the mavoi. That's what it said in the Mishnah. But the question was asked on this, could this be true? You place the food of the Eruv Chatzeris in the Chatzer, but Vatnan, we learned in the Mishnah, if you place the food of your Eruv not in a regular house, you place it like in an entrance going into a house, a small little entrance, or a chsadre, on like a patio which has a roof over it, but it's not a regular house, or a merpeses, on a porch, ein Eruv, it's not an Eruv. So what do you see over here? You can't place an Eruv in one of these places. The Eruv has to be placed in a proper house. V'adarsham, someone that lives in these kinds of places, ein oiser, he doesn't ask on anybody else to carry in the chutzner. So you can't learn the previous Mishnah that said that the Eruv Chatzeris is placed in the chutzner, that could be true. You don't put the Eruv Chatzeris in the chutzner. So therefore we have to read that Mishnah as follows. Amos say, Eruv Chatzeris bebayis sheb'chutzner. The food of the Eruv Chatzeris, you're trying to make everyone live in one house, so therefore you have to put the food in one house in this chutzner. V'shitufei muvois, and when you combine the mavoi, that all the chatzeiros is everyone's living in one chutzner, b'chutzner sheb'mavi, that's placed in the chutzner of the mavoi. And therefore the Gemara concludes, the same thing also applies to a small house that's less than 4 by 4 amas. This small house, it's not any worse than the chatzar itself. You don't need it to be in a house. So even if it happens to be in this small house, make believe as if there's no roof over there. Make believe as if it's outside. Doesn't matter. So therefore you could put Yeruv Chatzeris there. The Gemara goes to the next halach. It said in the Mishnah, you can't consider this to be like it's sticking out, like the city is extending to this area. If you have a little house that's over there, and you want to consider the city this to be an extension of the city, you can't use this little house as an extension. The Gemara explains, we don't even consider it to be like a burgonin. Burgonin is a little hut. The Gemara says in Erevin that even if you have a little hut, that could be considered an extension of the city. So over here, we're saying here, this is not even a hut, this is actually a house. But because this house is less than 4 by 4 amas, it's not considered to be an extension. So the Gemara says, my time, why not? Isn't this larger than a hut? So the Gemara explains, I'll tell you why. Burgonin, the hut, chazu lemilse. It's fit for use for what it's made for. Lemilsayo, that is. For its use, it's fit. It's not made as a house. It's made as a hut, maybe to put things there or to be there temporarily. So the hut could be used for what it's intended. But, this house that's smaller than 4 by 4 amas, it can't be used for what it's intended to be. People don't live there. So therefore it's worthless. It's not considered to be an extension of the city. The next thing the Mishnah said, and this is going to be the last thing we're going to learn today, in the pshat of this braisa, the brothers and partners cannot divide a house that's 4 by 4 amas. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, what does this mean? Taime, the less bei dal damas. You're saying the reason they can't divide it is because it's too small and it doesn't have 4 amas. Is bei dal damas, but if it's large enough that it has 4 amas, this house, chalkin, then you could divide it. But is that true? Could you divide a house that's only 4 by 4 amas? Can't. Because what now? We learned in the Mishnah in Masechta Baba Basra, ein chalkin es achatze, you don't divide a courtyard or a house, ad sheheba arba amas lezeh, there has to be 8 amas, 8 by 8 amas. Enough 4 amas for this individual and 4 amas for this individual. So why is it saying here in this braisa that only because it's so small that it's only 4 amas you can't divide it? If it's not 8 amas, you can't divide it. So the Gemara answers, you're right, we have to say a different pshat. We're not talking about dividing the house. Ella rather, Eima, say the pshat as follows. Ein by din chalukah b'chatzar. The usual halacha that applies when you divide a chatzar, so everybody that gets a certain piece in a chatzar or a certain piece in a house, there's certain rights that he gets, as we're going to see here in a moment. It's going to be a machlokes, but there's certain rights that he gets. If your house that you have is smaller than 4 by 4 amas, you don't get those rights in the chalukah, in the division. And what is those rights? So the Gemara brings 2 opinions. The Amar Ravuna said, chatzar, if you have a courtyard and you have houses that open up into this courtyards. Lefi psachel mischalekes. You divide the courtyard according to the amount of doors that are there. What does this mean? Let's say you have one huge house that opens up to this courtyard, 1 door. Then you have another 3 small doors that open up into this court. 3 small houses with doors that open up to this courtyard. According to Ravuna, the one that has 1 large house is going to get 1/4, and the other ones that have 3 small houses that open up to this courtyard, they're going to get 3/4, because you don't go according to the size of the houses. You go according to the doors that open up. That's Rav Huna's opinion. Rav Chisda says, no. You don't divide the entire courtyard based on the doors that open up, but rather you do as follows. Noisin l'chol pesach arba amas. Every person that has a door opening into the courtyard, you get 4 amas for your door. In other words, you get the width of the door. Let's say your door is 10 amas wide. So first of all, you get the width of your door, but then in front of it, you get a space of 4 amas. It's a space to be able to put down your packages and things like that. So everyone gets 4 amas. V'ashar, and then the rest of the chatzar, you divide it equally. You don't divide it 1/4 and 3/4 like Rav Huna. Okay, so now we see over here basically that you have a door that opens up into a chatzar. You get certain rights, whether you get a certain part in the chatzar or you get a certain space, 4 amas. You have certain rights because of that. So Dahanimili, when is this all true that you get those rights? Bias. The Lamahavi, again, and Dahanimili bias, the Lamahavi, Kayahivnale Chatzar. So a house it's made to remain. Lemahevi means it's made to stay. You're gonna leave that house. You're gonna live in that house. So therefore, you give him his rights that he's supposed to get here in this chutzner. The limits high though. This house, this tiny little house that's less than 4 by 4 amis, the limits are koi. It's going to be demolished. A person can't live in such a small house. Loi yavinun lechotzer. We don't give him his rights in the chotzer, whether according to Rav Huna's opinion, whether according to Rav Chisda's opinion, he doesn't have any rights in this chotzer.